seemingly, at least in my estimation, um, um, repeatedly and consistently and increasingly complex situation, um, and some apparent repetition and some apparent contradiction between the various Mishnayot. Um, uh, we're we're on the fourth Mishnah of the third chapter, and in this case, the previous um, uh, uh, the first Mishnah dealt with four brothers, two who were married to two sisters, and now we're dealing with um, three brothers, two of whom are married to two sisters, or to a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her granddaughter, either the daughter of her daughter or the daughter of her son. In these cases, elu choltzot velo mityabamot. So in this case, two of the women are sisters, or in other relationships, mother and daughter, grandmother and granddaughter. In any case, they are forbidden due to close family relationships. This is Isur Erva. This is, and in these cases, Elu Holtzot velo mityabamot. So in these cases, the surviving brother neither does not marry either of the sisters, but rather they do chalitza, both of them, and that's it. Rabbi Shimon disagrees, and he poter. He exempts them even from the obligation to perform chalitza. They are peturim or peturot. Patur, we have to distinguish between asur and patur. Patur is the opposite. They're not obligated to do either one. They are freed because of, according to Rabbi Shimon, because of the close family relationship. Now the Mishnah continues. One of these sisters was related, and therefore it's an Isur Erva, Isur Erva. It's a family relationship. It is forbidden because of that family relationship. Asur ba umutar ba'achota. But only one of the sisters is related. The other sister is not related. They have different fathers. So they're not related. One of them is, one of them is not. Or Isur mitzvah or Isur kedusha, or they are related in a more distant way. Remember, we've seen this now twice. Isur mitzvah is interpreted to mean these are the secondary relationships, not in the Torah, but the rabbis added on extra relationships that are considered forbidden, but they don't rise to the level of the Torah prohibitions. They are called Isur Mitzvah or Isur Kedusha. I'm sorry, I have to cut that one off. Okay. It's only B'nai Shurin. I'll get it later. Or Isur Kedusha. And you remember this is a Kohen or Kohen Gadol who have limitations whom they can marry. In all of these cases, that is, one of the sisters is related and therefore it's a Isur Erva, the other is not, or the Isur is not of Isur Erva, but a lesser Isur, Isur Mitzvah or Isur Kedusha. In all of these cases, Chalitza is done because there is a relationship that has to be broken, but there cannot be a levirate marriage. Let's look for a minute at the translation, because the translation adds some commentary. In the case of three brothers, two of the three are married to close relatives. This is Isur Erva. For example, either the two girls are sisters, or we have a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her granddaughter, whether it be the daughter of her son or the daughter of her daughter. If the two brothers were married to two close relatives and they died without children, and their wives happened before, this is a strange English, but they came before the third brother, who is the surviving of the three brothers, and they came for levirate marriage, these two women who are related, and therefore it is an Isur Erva, these perform Chalitza, but cannot marry the surviving brother. Each of them is a relative of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. And therefore, he marries neither of them, and they both do Chalitza. Rabbi Shimon exempts them even from the obligation to perform Chalitza. Then the other case, one of the sisters is forbidden. The third brother, the surviving brother, due to a prohibition against marrying a forbidden relative, meaning they have a family relationship and therefore it's considered erva, then he is prohibited from marrying her. But if the other one is not related, he may marry that sister who also lost her husband, the other brother of the surviving brother. Because the woman who is forbidden to him is not considered to be a woman who requires him for levirate marriage, there's only one woman who does come for levirate marriage. One is forbidden, the other is not. He is permitted to marry the one who is not. However, if one of the sisters is forbidden due to a prohibition that is a less prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, that is the extra relationships that the rabbis added to the Torah prohibitions, or because the man is a Kohen and therefore there are limitations, then in these cases, halitza must be done. Levirate marriage is not permitted. This is because these prohibitions of a lesser severity do not completely cancel the levirate bond. So again, what we're seeing here, to kind of give it a more global view, which if we get into this, into its depth, you can imagine that the Talmud just adds more complexity. Of course, it's going to explain this and when there is a dispute, will give reasoning for it. And often, like here, Rabbi Shimon Poter, the Mishnah itself doesn't tell us why he says they don't even have to do chalitza. But in the Talmud, it explains why he says no, they don't even need chalitza. This is in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud 28b. There is a Baraita that is an external Mishnah, which explains this. The verse that is referred to is one we saw: Isha el achota lo tikach litzuror. And this litzuror is the root for the rival wife. When they are rival wives, like here, two of them are both obligated to levirate marriage, you don't take them either, you don't take either one of them, for they are both peturot from yibum because of their relationship. And according to Rabbi Shimon, they are also peturot from chalitza. Questions? Yes, Nelson. Unmute.
Yes.
Okay.
Other cultures, I assume, also have levirate marriage. And do you have any idea about the relationship between the rules here and those in other cultures?
Let me do a little research, because I can't answer that question. This whole business of what happens to a woman whose husband dies and there are no children is a real problem in pre-modern societies. If the woman is childless and has left the father's house, in pre-modern society, she was really in a bad situation economically and sociologically. So let me check what we know about other cultures. I really don't know. Excellent question. Other questions? Okay, let's go on. As you can assume, we're going to continue with um, here.
I have a question about the previous mission about the kedusha.
About the Isur Kedusha.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I'm just thinking about a Kohen, like a Kohen hedyot, a regular Kohen can't marry a divorcee,
Right,
but he can marry a widow.
right.
And these women we're talking about here are widows.
That's right.
So the only Kohen that would be prevented from a Isur Kedusha would be the Kohen Gadol.
That is correct.
It's sort of an edge case.
However, if we're talking about women, say, who converted,
Ah,
the
okay.
sisters both converted. Okay,
Uh-huh. That's
Kohen
also
cannot
okay.
marry a Giore.
Uh-huh.
That would be Isur Kedusha also.
Yeah, okay. All right, that makes sense. By the way, this whole thing with Kohanim in the divorce community is a real problem.
Could you expand upon that?
Yes, men, at least in my age group, men who are Kohanim who are divorced have a very, very hard time finding eligible women because there aren't widows
to remarry.
There aren't widows to remarry.
And that's why,
That's because
well, you may,
of the age of the groom.
Yeah, so I'm talking about people in their 40s and 50s. We put on social events, singles events to try and help people meet up. And a lot of the Kohanim will say, well, are there going to be any women that I can meet that are eligible? And we might say there's one or two. We'll have a party with 50, 60 people coming. They'll come look at the one or two. Oh, I already know them. They're not for me, and leave.
Curious question, Gabe. What is the male-female ratio there? Jewish male-female ratio, about 10 to 1?
Yeah. So for the Kohanim, it's tough, but in the regular population, there are more women than men who are looking to remarry. So when we put on events, we limit the women. We don't allow the ratio to get out of hand. So
Hashem.
So first come, first serve for the women, and we usually do about 60-40.
You may recall many years ago, one of the Supreme Court justices in Israel, Chaim Cohen, came to New York because he was marrying a divorcee, and he couldn't get married in Israel, so he came to New York and was married by a conservative rabbi. His grandson is now the rabbi, the senior rabbi of Temple Tiferet Israel here, Jonathan Cohen. But that made news then.
Mm-hmm. They go to Cyprus.
In the conservative movement, if a Kohen wants to marry a divorcee, the solution is that the Kohen can renounce his status as a Kohen. What is the status today without a temple? Well, in more traditional congregations, the Kohen gets the first aliyah and can duchen, can bless the congregation. And then it's traditional, if you're sitting at a table, that you give the honor of inviting people to bench after the meal to the Kohen.
Also Pidyon Ben.
And Pidyon Ben, he gets a chance to function, obviously, I don't know what happens in Israel, but here the money goes to charity, not to the Kohen. When when the father, in most cases at least, chooses to keep the son rather than take the money.
Steve,
Yeah,
in my program this summer, Blue Greenberg came to speak about agunot.
Oh, wonderful.
But one of her basic solution, that she's in a group, or she's the head of a group with dealing with the problem, and she said that there are ways to annul the first marriage. And she had, and I don't remember the name of an Orthodox rabbi had written a book with all these ways of annulling the first marriage so that the woman didn't become an aguna. Wouldn't that also solve your problem?
yes, sort of. If the woman, I don't know, if she already got divorced, instead of annulling her marriage, it might be too
Okay,
late.
yeah, you're right, it's too late, okay.
I don't know. Maybe ex post facto, you could go back and annul it, and that would annul the divorce too. I don't know.
You know, this business of annulling, one of the ways that has been used is, well, I'm not a real rabbi, so if I did the wedding, we can annul it.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I know a case. I know of a case where somebody tried to annul his I forget why he wanted to annul his, because he was a Kohen. He wanted to get an annulment for his, well, I don't remember, whatever. And the excuse, if he wanted to get an annulment for a second potential wife, and he's conservative and goes to conservative shul in Israel, and he went to get the annulment by saying that the rabbi who married the potential second wife originally was a conservative rabbi, so the wedding doesn't count. And so he wants to get married, and then he didn't understand why the people in the shul were really angry at him.
Rabbi, can you explain, maybe you did this, the rationale why a Kohen is not permitted to marry a divorcee?
The Torah considers puts the Kohen on a special higher level, and so this marriage relationship should be, quote, on a higher level. It's not democratic, but because the Torah states it specifically, it's explicit in the text itself in the Torah. So it presents a problem that is, you know, my own feeling with regard to the aguna is that the rabbis long ago could have solved these problems. They solved many much more difficult ones, but because it only affects women, they haven't devoted the attention. And thank God now we do have people who are finding ways to solve this problem. I recall when I was a student at the seminary that the switchboard operator and a couple other people who worked for the seminary were agunot. They had lost their husbands in the Second World War. They were lost in the war, either captured or killed, but it was unknown and no one could testify to where they were. In contrast to American law, where after 7 years, the man is considered dead. That doesn't work in Jewish law. And so I guess the rabbis who told these women that they're out of luck, that they can't remarry, took pity on them and gave them jobs. But I didn't know the switchboard operator well, but I can't imagine that that was a satisfactory solution to their dilemma. It's good that people are working on it, and it is not only an issue for non-Orthodox Jews, but it is now an issue increasingly for Orthodox Jews. Next Mishnah. Again, we have 3 brothers. In the Mishnah Dalet, it was 2 were married to 2 sisters. In Mishnah Hay, we have 3 brothers, 2 of them married to 2 sisters, but in the first Mishnah, it doesn't state what happened to the 3rd brother. 2 of them are married to 2 sisters, both of them died childless. Doesn't say anything about the 3rd brother. In the next Mishnah, it does say that the 3rd brother is mufneh. He was single. He wasn't married. Panui. When you go into Israel and you want to ask if a seat is taken because it's a crowded place, you ask, Hakiseh hazeh panui? Is this seat free? Is it not taken? Panui.
Available.
Is it available? Very good. Thank you, Steve. Echad mufneh. He's not married. So one of the brothers who is married dies, again, we have to assume, childless. And the unmarried 3rd brother does what we have seen already, ma'amar. That is, he does the first part of marriage. He commits himself to a woman, ma'amar, but he does not yet marry her. This is the first, the erusin is done, but not the nisu'in. Kiddushin, he said, Hare at mekudeshet li, but then they went back home. She to her family, he to his family. A year or so later, another ceremony. This is not a complete marriage, only erusin, only ma'amar. He said it, but he did not act upon it. Then the 2nd brother dies. Oy Gott. So in this case, we have a dispute again between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai says, Ishto imo, the one that he committed to, who is his wife, not completely, but for Beit Shammai, it's a relationship that counts. For after all, if you want to break that relationship, she needs a get. So it counts, even though they haven't lived together. The Hala and the 2nd widow, Teitzei, she's out of luck because Ahot Isha. She is the sister of a married woman. So this man can't marry both sisters. He's married to the first one. The second one's out of luck. Beit Hillel says, no. In the first woman, the case of the first woman, motzi et ishto beget uva chalitza. He divorces this woman who has never fully married, and she performs chalitza to break the connection. Ve'eshet achiv b'chalitza. And the second widow also does chalitza. So the single brother does not marry either widow. Zohi she'amru. This is what they mean when they say, Oy lo al ishto, ve'oy lo al eshet achiv. Woe is him for the first woman with whom he made a commitment, and woe is he for the wife of his brother. Woe is he, oilo. So he's out of luck according to Beit Hillel. Let's look at the English. Again, we have three brothers. Two of them are married to two sisters. The third brother is single. And what happens? One husband dies without a child, leaving behind his widow. The single brother starts the process of marrying her. He does the ma'amar, the erusin, but he does not finish the process and is not fully married. The single brother performed an act of betrothal to his sister-in-law, but did not yet consummate the marriage by engaging in sexual intercourse. That is, it's a commitment, but not a full marriage. Afterwards, the second brother who is married dies, and now he's got another widow. Therefore, the second brother's wife, the sister of the first brother's wife, who now is betrothed to the single brother. So this second wife comes before the single brother also to be married. Beit Shammai says in this case, the first one to whom he has already made a commitment, he can stay married to her. She is considered, since the process began with the betrothal, she is considered like his wife, and he is not required to divorce her. And the second widow has to leave the single brother-in-law, who's no longer single. He's now married to the woman's sister. And since he is married to the woman's sister, he cannot marry her. Beit Hillel, however, says the marriage with the first widow was not complete. It was only partial. He never really committed to that woman. It was only erusin. It was not nisuin. They never lived together. So in that case, according to Beit Hillel, he has to perform, he is required to perform levirate marriage with both women. That's our commentary. The Mishnah doesn't say that. The Mishnah says that Beit Hillel says he is motzi et ishto beget ubachalitza and eshet achiv bachalitza. So the commentary here adds that he's required to perform levirate marriage with both women. Therefore, he divorces his wife. So in other words, he's giving you the thinking. The thinking of Beit Hillel is, this is not fully a marriage. Therefore, the man is not married to the woman's sister. Therefore, he is required to marry both women. But he, in this case, he divorces the first wife with whom he just betrothed her. He never really finished the marriage. He divorces her, which now then nullifies the betrothal, and chalitza he also performs, and that nullifies the bond that he had with his sister-in-law, and he also performs chalitza with the second woman. And then he says they comment, that is Beit Hillel would comment, this is the case that was referred to when the sages said, woe unto him for his wife, and woe unto him for the wife of his brother. Due to the combination of circumstances, he loses, well, I don't know whether you want to call it loss, but he has no relationship with either sister. Nelson. And I'll call Steve in a minute. Yes, Nelson.
Well, I'm wondering about why the sister would interfere with her sister's marriage. That by coming forth and asking to be married to her betrothed, the sister can't marry the man she's betrothed to. And I'm wondering if they do get married, there wouldn't be a constant fighting relationship between the two sisters.
Of course there would.
The man is well rid of the two of them, but that sister is so, I don't know, self-centered that she has to spoil her sister's potential happiness.
Well, it's not. They're really not thinking in those terms. They're thinking in terms. The two questions that they're thinking is how strong is the act of ma'amar, of betrothal? Does this form the relationship, or is it weak and not a full relationship? Beit Shammai says it's too weak. It doesn't really count. Beit Hillel says, it counts. He's got to give a divorce. The second thing that they're considering is, can a man marry two sisters? Answer, no. It's forbidden. Isur erva, not a minor prohibition, a major prohibition. It's explicit in the Torah. And that's what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about the feelings of the women. That's not in their purview. Yes, Nelson.
But in the case of Jacob, it was clearly a problem between his wives who were sisters.
No question, no question about it. And um, and I would agree with you that these situations of plural marriage are bound to cause problems. You know, in certain Mormon sects, it still exists. It exists among Muslims, very much so. But I don't know any television shows about women, Muslims in plural marriages, but I know there's one, I've never watched it. There's one about a Mormon family with plural marriage. I don't recall what it's called, but it was on TV. I don't know if it still is. And I'm sure it's a situation for lots of plot lines. Steve. No.
How about the wives of
Yeah,
King
I'm here.
Solomon?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there were terrible problems. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Steve.
Okay, so Hillel and Shammai lived, I think, about 1,000 years or 700 years before Rabbi Gershom. That's I think that's irrelevant. So once he made his edict, I understand most of what we've been discussing. But before he's made this edict, which I think it expired in the last 20 years, and I think it was renewed again. You can, by who and if it was, you can comment on that, if it's in effect once again for another 1,000 years. But what was the case in the period before Rabbi Gershom's edict in the Jewish community for all those centuries? And before Hillel and Shammai as well. So what is the issue here? I don't even understand the issue. It was allowed and permitted and a common custom in Jewish, in Judaism, both Sephardic, which continued further along more than in time than the Ashkenazim, but it was common. So where was the whole issue of not having two wives?
One of the issues in halakha is how much attention do we pay to the surroundings in which the Jewish community is living. And Rabbeinu Gershon, living in Germany in a Christian society where there was no plural marriage, versus Jews who lived under Islamic rule where plural marriage was common. I've said before that Israel accepted some Yemenite families where there was more than one wife, did not force the man to divorce one of his wives. However, Israel did not permit any marriages to take place, plural marriages in Israel. One of the things that did change early on, already in rabbinic times, was the year between Erusin and Nisu'in. That was eliminated. It was eliminated because of the problem of a couple that were committed to each other but weren't living together, and the possibility or the thing that happened is that they really didn't want to complete the relationship. They didn't want to live together. Either she or he decided, no, this is not for me. And so that was solved early on. I really don't know how much plural marriage was taking place in Europe. Let me do a little research on that among Jews. Maybe Karen knows. Karen?
No, I was just going to say, that isn't what I wanted to say in the first place, but to Steve, they're not talking about a man with two wives at all. They're just talking about a man married to two sisters.
That's right.
But what I wanted to say was the whole point of levirate marriage was supposed to be so someone was supporting this woman who had no children.
Right.
So is this one of the cases? Usually Hillel is the more compassionate one and Shammai is the stricter. Is this one of the cases where Shammai wins out because this poor woman who is betrothed to the third brother thinks she has someone who's going to support her? And in other cases in the Talmud, that betrothal was as if you were married. It was a legal thing where you had to get, I think you had to get a get.
That's true.
So they're married. So when the second, third brother, whichever, the one that dies, I agree with Hillel on this. He's already basically married to the widow of the first one.
Yeah. Well, if you recall, we had this dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel in chapter 2, and if you recall, there was in the Talmud another opinion that switches the opinions of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, making Beit Hillel a more lenient. I don't see anything in this case that happens in the Talmud. In this case, let me double check that, and I will. Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, in 3:5. Okay.
It looks, Safaria ends up with, it looks like the one that they say is Beit Hillel is what we go by. From that little comment, due to the combination, he loses them both. So it looks like that's what Talmud went with.
Yeah. Let me just 1 second. Let me look in Steinsaltz. Okay, just 1 second, because as I mentioned, one of the real pluses of Steinsaltz Talmud is that he gives you the law. He tells you what the halacha is. So this is the halacha. There is a case of 3 brothers, 2 of whom were married to 2 sisters, and the husband of one of the sisters died. Afterward, the 3rd brother performed levirate betrothal with the widowed sister, but before he could consummate the levirate marriage with her, the other sister's husband died as well, without children, understood? At which point, this sister happened before the 3rd brother, that is, came before the 3rd brother for levirate marriage too. In this case, the 3rd brother must send both sisters away. She who received, that is the first one, who received levirate betrothal is sent away with a bill of divorce and chalitza, and her sister must perform chalitza too. This ruling is in accordance with the statement of Beit Hillel, and he quotes Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch.
The issue here then, to me, is the other sister, and what's it called, Aguna? Is she permitted to marry?
She's not an aguna, she's a widow. She's an almanah. And she is permitted to marry, but not the Kohen Gadol. Yes, Nelson. Nelson, go ahead.
Go back to what Karen said, that the whole point of this is to provide some kind of support for the widow. Depending on the terms of the get, that may or may not be true. The fact that she gets a get, it may actually put her in worse circumstance because there aren't adequate resources to support her outside of marriage.
That's true, but she is free to marry someone else. She's no longer tied to her first husband.
Can't she then marry her first husband anyway?
Her first husband died.
I'm not. What I mean is the one who gave her the get.
No, she can't marry. The surviving brother cannot marry either sister, according to Beit Hillel. And the reason is the woman who performed levirate marriage he has to divorce her, which nullifies the betrothal because of divorce. That cuts that tie, and then he cuts another tie with chalitza. That's the tie of being the brother-in-law, the surviving brother of her husband. So
that just means that he doesn't have to marry her, but can they marry anyway?
No, he can't. If both brothers die, and if he had married her, finished the process, that is, not only betrothed her, but also married her, done. The second wife then performs chalitza, and that's it. He stays married to the first one. Had he consummated the marriage? In this case, he didn't consummate the marriage.
I understand, but normally can't a couple that actually get fully divorced with a get and subsequently change their minds and get married again?
Yes.
Why can't they?
Because of the sister relationship, which in that verse in Vayikra, it specifically talks about a man marrying a woman and her sister is forbidden, and the rabbis emphasize that relationship.
I know he can't marry both of them, but
he can't marry either.
Why can't he marry the one he was married to first?
Had he done it before the other one, before his other brother died, he could have stayed married. Had he finished the process and married her, done. He's married, and the other sister, he does chalitza, and she's off.
Okay, but I understand that. But why can't they decide he had the get and decide it was a mistake in one way or another, and marry the woman that he had been betrothed to? She wants to marry him, he wants to marry her, and just put the sister to the side, her sister-in-law to the side, or her sister to the side.
I don't think that would be permitted, but let me double check. Marry.
No, because you can't marry two sisters. So if neither one is a complete marriage, then then you're kind of engaged to them both. And so they're both illegal.
You mentioned,
the thinking
Rabbi,
behind it. It's not necessarily logical, but that's what they come up with.
Rabbi, you
That
mentioned,
relationship, those relationships are what decides things. And
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm very unclear about a lot of this, but I wonder where you have differences in the rulings by Hillel versus Shammai. Is there an assumption that their positions are taken because of their views of Torah law or other reasons? In other words, they differ with regard to how they think Hashem would view this or something else? What is the fundamental basis of their differences, and why are their differences not spelled out in the text, so we understand why Hillel thought a certain way, why Shammai thought a certain way, and so forth?
well, they are discussed in the Gemara, in the Talmud, and reasons are given. Probably now 100 years ago, Professor Louis Finkelstein, who later became the chancellor of the seminary, wrote an article that for a while was quite in vogue. He later on in his life withdrew it and said he was wrong. But in that article, he makes the argument that Beit Hillel represents the common man, and that Beit Shammai represents a more elite view. So, for instance, there's a dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel in terms of how you recite Kiddush on Friday night. Interestingly enough, in the old Reform Sidurim, they follow Beit Shammai. That is, you say the bracha about Shabbat before you say the bracha about wine. Beit Hillel says, and that's what we follow, first you say the prayer for wine, and then you say the prayer for Shabbat. The argument that Finkelstein made then was wine was drunk by elites at every meal. What's special about wine? They drank wine all the time. They had no problems affording wine. The common man, however, didn't drink wine every day. And for the common man, Friday night with wine was already special. Again, as I say, Finkelstein withdrew his article and said, no, he was wrong. But I have to say, I'm not so sure that he should have withdrawn it. Steve.
I'm not sure what the reform procedure is in terms of saying Kiddush today, but it's interesting if they have a more strict view, and yet they not so strict when it comes to kashereth.
No, well, listen, now in the newest reform prayer book, they go back, they do the traditional order. Let me see if I can find it. Somehow well, I'll find it. Steve, did you want to?
Yeah, okay, so Hillel and Shammai and other sages over the millennia have discussed these issues in great detail. They seem to apply today in a similar way to some groups as they did in the past. So my question is about consummation. And there seems to be answers that are discussed in the Mishnah. So what is the answer about consummation of a marriage when one party and the other party have a different viewpoint of what occurred? And because we know that there needs to be, in most cases, in many cases, it's quoted that there needs to be two witnesses. Well, there aren't witnesses usually when people consummate a marriage. So what would your comment be that they both claim differently? How is that settled? That's a difficult one.
Yes, in most cases, the man is believed, but I'm sure you know the stories about virgins and the expectation that the first sexual contact that the woman has should produce blood, and the stories about the groom bringing out the sheets from the first night and claiming that that there is no blood and she is not a virgin. You have to understand that again, we have this very unequal, problematic view that a virginity of among men is certainly not a requirement, not an expectation, but among women it is a major concern. And one of the real serious things that rabbis deal with, in fact, it's already in the Torah, a man who is motzi shem ra, he is lying about his wife's virginity or lack thereof. So the assumption, of course, is if the man and the woman are alone, that's the first time they've ever been alone, that the marriage is consummated. And the big issue for traditional Judaism is if the woman had not been married before, was she a virgin? You know, the ketubah, which states it is a legal document of a commitment of the groom to his wife, and a virgin, a betulah, gets double the amount of basic support as a woman who has previously been married. So it's a question of money too. Karen.
So I actually learned this one this summer.
Great.
It's accurate, that originally in the Mishnah, and I don't even know, maybe the Talmud part of it, that there were 3 ways to become married. One was the document, the shtar. One was by changing money, like a zuz or something you paid. And the third way was consummation. But already by, I think, the end of the Talmud being redacted, they eliminated the consummation as a way of performing a marriage, and it was only the shtar and the zuz, and that's where the first one was where he when they're in this case that they're talking about in our Mishnah, he did the document first, and then they waited a year to change the money. And what we do at weddings now is you sign the ketubah, which is your shtar, your document, and then you give her a ring, and that's the money, and that's performed at the same time. But they've eliminated Steve's problem about the consummation. That's not a whatever, a document of being married. Does that answer the question?
It sure does, but there's a further question then. The engagement, in my conservative learning that I had years ago, the engagement is equal, if not more important, than the marriage that you just expressed.
Not today. Today, the two things that are happen at the wedding. That in the times of the Talmud, they would get engaged, and then they would have a year. The year, I think, was supposed to be to save up money so they could afford to be married, basically. But we've eliminated that now. We do both things at the wedding.
And that's,
Is the viewpoint on this the same in the Orthodox as it is in the conservative movement?
Yes, my
absolutely,
teachers were all Orthodox.
absolutely. Absolutely. But it's not something new. That was already established in Talmudic time.
Yeah.
That the two
Yeah.
parts of the ceremony were combined. As we will see, if we ever get there to Kiddushin, the beginning of Kiddushin states that a man acquires a wife, sorry about the language, but that's what it is, Bekesef shtar uvia. Kesef, money, shtar, a document, bia, sexual relations. Karen, of course, is correct in that the rabbis already in Talmudic times eliminated the bia as a way of without a gift of something worth more than a pruta. You know that the ring that the groom puts on the bride can have no stones, no precious stones or non-precious stones. Here's my ring. I have one too, because we did a double ring ceremony, but it has no stones. And the worry was that the bride would think she's getting something that she's not. So we don't want to trick anybody. And that's why the ring that is used under the chuppah can have no precious or non-precious stones on it. It must be owned by the groom. So if he's using somebody else's ring, it has to be kind of a gift to that man, and he can then gift it back to the owner after the wedding. But that's the way it's done today. And that's why we have 2 cups of wine. That's why we have the birchot erusin over the first cup, and the birchot nisuin, the sheva brachot, over the second cup. We're doing 2 ceremonies, combining them at the same.
What's the viewpoint, Rabbi, of this modern development of both walking around 7 times around each other and of double ring? Is there a viewpoint officially from the conservative movement, or I know the Orthodox wouldn't approve it?
Well, this business of the walking around, of course, is a relatively recent phenomenon. I've done a couple of weddings like that, where they kind of do 3.5 and 3.5, or they do a do-si-do or whatever, and, as an attempt to kind of equalize things. Because, and the same thing with the double ring ceremony. When our oldest daughter was married in Israel, and the Rabbanut, she wanted to be married under the Rabbanut, and she wanted to give her husband a ring. The Orthodox rabbi who signed all the papers and kind of made it happen, said you can't do it at the same time as your husband gives you the ring. You have to do it. If you want to do it, it's at the very end of the ceremony. We can't do it at the same time. Why? Because in halacha, the man has the authority exclusively to begin the relationship and to end the relationship. And if she were to give a ring to her husband immediately after her husband gave her a ring, it would look like they were equal. And I think I've mentioned this before, that the Romans, in contrast to the Jews, did have a much
Where's
more
his volume?
equal
He's muted.
relationship of the man and the woman. And the rabbis were very, very insistent on keeping it unequal. And we today, given the scene that we're dealing with today, are faced with these issues that the Romans didn't have, but we do. And so we're working through these things, some quicker than others. That's why we have Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, and within each of them a wide variety. But we're working through these things. These are current issues that face us, and the question then is tradition and change and modernity. How can we still make the tradition live and be relevant today, when our understanding of the relationship in a marriage and just the placement of women in general in society is so different from the way it has been since time immemorial?
Rabbi, I wonder, I'm not in any way, I believe in equality for the most part, but I wonder what arguments might be made for a hierarchy in a marital relationship. Some of my Christians say, yes, the man should be head of the house. If there's a distinction, we will defer to the men. I wonder what arguments might be made to support that distinction. So we have a Kohen, an Yisrael, a Levi, and so forth. There are distinctions in shul. What about these differences in marriage?
Well, again, it's traditionally, obviously, the man, had a standing above the woman, some of us find that distasteful. But everybody works that out, and that's one of the fascinating things to watch I mean, I think I've mentioned this before, that whenever I did a wedding, I insisted on counseling before them. And one of the interesting things is that when you come from a home, you experience what marriage is like based on what you see, what you experience in your home. So, for instance, in my home, my father, alav shalom, would expect dinner on the table at 6 o'clock. And if it wasn't on the table at 6 o'clock, there was hell to be paid. After my father ate dinner, he would go to his favorite chair, smoke his cigar, which was almost constantly in his mouth from his first coffee until he went to bed. I mean, not the same cigar, obviously. He would sit in his favorite chair and read the newspaper. My mother had to clean up, do the dishes, and everything else. My mother, aleh shalom, yard site's coming up soon, sent me almost every week to her parents for Shabbat. There I witnessed a very different scene. My grandfather was in the kitchen helping my grandmother prepare the dinner, and after the dinner, helping to clean up. And I got the message growing up, be like your grandfather.
Yeah, but your grandfather was not working anymore.
Oh,
Now the
yes, he
role-
was. Oh, yes, he
Oh.
was. He was
Oh.
working full time. No, that's not so. He worked just as much as my father. It was a different model. My father had a traditional macho model of a man, the woman serves the man, and that's the way it is. He didn't think much of my wife or of me in terms of our relationship. I was a feminist before I knew the word, but that's because of my mother, not because of my father. But one of the interesting things to deal with and is a bride and a groom who come from obviously every house is different, every family is different, every marital relationship is different. But when you have one coming from one type of thing, like for instance, my wife never vacuumed. Her father never vacuumed. My wife didn't do the laundry. Her father didn't do the laundry. Guess what? I always did the vacuuming, and I always did the laundry. My father never did either one, not anything near it. But every couple, you kind of work it out. You work it out or you fight like hell, one or the other.
Rabbi, to what extent do you feel this sort of thing, these specifics should be discussed in the presence of a rabbi or privately prior to being married?
Well, I think they come up. Sometimes they come up. I give these kinds of tests to the couple to try and find areas of disagreement and areas of potential conflict. But I'm not in the house with them once they get married. And
Rabbi, this has been resolved by the vacuum producers. They have these robotic vacuums.
I have one, and I agree. Absolutely, it doesn't do quite the same job, I have to tell you, but it's better than nothing. Anyhow,
Rab-
Steve,
Yeah, just a question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
The role but the role of whoever is the head of the household and the head of the house was different in the past. It was predominantly males. The head of the male was in the workforce, and the wife was in the home. But my question is, what's my question is, Rabbi Rosen did not answer my question yesterday. Maybe he had too many, half an hour Q&A. So my question to you is, the Jewish viewpoint on the differences between equality, equity, and justice, with justice being the highest level.
I'm incapable of answering that. I don't know that we have such distinctions in our texts. But I think one of the things we have to recognize, and that's a beautiful and I would say crucial element of our tradition, and that is that moral and even issues like you are addressing change over time. We become sensitive to things that our ancestors weren't sensitive to. I mentioned the place of women as one. You can mention also alternative sexual orientations. All of this stuff that our ancestors didn't deal with. And the question is, how are we going to deal with it, or are we just going to ignore it? I believe that we have to deal with it, and we're going to deal with it in different ways. And that's good. My dear friend and Eddie Feld just published a book on the law codes in the Torah, and I haven't read it. I started it, but I haven't read it completely yet. But apparently, from a review that I read, his underlying point is, in Judaism, we're not uniform. There's room for pluralistic view. I would argue that when we're dealing with these new issues and feeling our way, we're not going to agree, and that's okay. It's okay if we do it with respect for one another and with an understanding that none of us has the truth with a capital T. That belongs to God. So we're working on it. Nelson.
I just want to make one comment, or maybe it's a long comment, but in the family, the husband and wife bring different skills to the relationship. And though, even if the man is the boss, he is foolish if he overrules her on her expertise. So, for example, when Susan was working at an Orthodox day school and the rabbi had to deal with practical questions of kashrut, he deferred to the wives because they dealt with it every day. And I ran across a wonderful example of this online the other day, not a Jewish example, and it had to do with a man who was the pilot of a corporate jet, and the CEO of the company told him, when you're in my office, I'm the boss. But if I step into the cockpit, you're the boss.
Absolutely
and
right.
So the idea that there's only one boss is just total mistake of management. It's totally false. And any company that runs that way is going to will eventually fail.
I agree.
I
Okay,
thought-
folks. Well, have
Okay.
have a wonderful week. It's great to see you all, and wish you well, and enjoy the good weather. I hope you have.